Today's video is going to talk about how to become a pilot in the United States Army. I know a lot of you guys are always asking questions on how to become an Army helicopter pilot, so today I'm going to give you guys the keys to becoming an Army helicopter pilot as a commissioned officer. There are two routes and two ways to go about this. There's a warrant officer route and a commissioned officer route. If you ask me, the warrant officer route is definitely the better of the two options, but I chose the officer route. So I'm assuming high school is already done, you've already graduated high school, and you're thinking about the paths in order to commission as an officer. So that's step one. You have to have a route to commission. There are three ways to become a commissioned officer in the United States Army. Number one is the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Number two is an Army ROTC program at basically any university. And number three is OCS, or Officer Candidacy School. All of these routes are very different, and it all really depends on your personality and what you're really looking for through the program that you're going to choose. So from difficult to easiest, U.S. Military Academy at West Point clearly is the most difficult one to get into, and you have to do that for 4 years. ROTC is a little easier. You get to do it during college though, so you get the real college experience plus being a military cadet at the same time. And then OCS is a quick condensed version of the other two. So let's talk about West Point. If you want to go to West Point, you kind of have to start that process probably your freshman year of high school. There are certain requirements that you have to meet in high school before you can even apply. One of those, for example, is you have to have 2 years of sport. So if you decide your senior year you want to go to West Point, they're going to say, hey, have you done 2 years of sport? So if your senior year of high school, you decide, hey, I want to go to West Point, you don't have time to get those 2 years of sports in. The reason they do that is every cadet at West Point has to be involved with or play some type of sport or extracurricular activity. And next is your grades. In order to get into West Point, it's extremely competitive. You have to have really good academic grades. And lastly, you need a letter of recommendation or endorsement from your local congressman or senator. I can't remember which one it is exactly, but you have to kind of decide by, I'd say, your sophomore year of high school if this is something you want to do in order to achieve and meet the requirements over the next 2 years before you graduate high school. So you get into U.S. Military Academy and you go there for 4 years. At the end of your U.S. Military Academy experience, you're going to get a branch. And it can be any branch in the military. Aviation is the number one hardest and most difficult branch to get. And how they decide is an order of merit list. So all the cadets are placed in order from whoever has the best GPA, best physical fitness scores, among other rating things. You get listed from every other cadet, from the best cadets to the not so best cadet. And essentially, the top cadets will choose aviation until aviation is no longer available. So if you don't do really well while you're at the U.S. Military Academy West Point, then it's going to be difficult for you at the end of it to branch aviation. And the service obligation is clearly active duty, so you will be in an active duty role if it's not aviation at the end of it. Option number two is the one that I chose, and this was ROTC. This option was a little more relaxed than U.S. Military Academy. It gives you an option to have a military structure while you're in college, but you also get to have a real, true college experience at the same time. Well, kind of, sort of a real, true college experience. This you'll also need to kind of start while you're in high school. Maybe your junior, senior year, you can decide, hey, I want to go to apply to an ROTC program. A lot of ROTC programs nowadays have full scholarships. I was fortunate enough to have a full scholarship where I applied my senior year to the U.S. Army ROTC program. If you meet the SAT score and GPA requirements, among other things, and you get accepted to an ROTC program, you then pick the university where you want to go that has an Army ROTC program. There is an option for a 2 or 3 year scholarship as well. If you're currently in college and you're thinking about joining ROTC, it's not too late. You have plenty of options throughout your college career to decide if it's something you want to do. You can always join later in your college experience. The college ROTC route, in my opinion, is the best experience for a few reasons. It is run by U.S. military cadre, but you get the real college experience. You're essentially a full-time college student who has to at sometimes take ROTC classes and do physical fitness sometimes in the morning. We would wake up at 5 in the morning and we would have our PT from 5:30 to 7 o'clock. During this PT hours, we'd work out. We would run for maybe 3 or 4 miles, usually sometimes up to 6. We would do some push-ups, some sit-ups, and some other workouts that would cover the 1.5 hour period. After that, we would go home, we would take a shower, and then we would get ready for our classes for the day. Sometimes if you had an 8 a.m. class, you'd have enough time to shower, get some breakfast, and go straight to class. And in addition, once a week, you had an ROTC class where you'd actually go to the class and had a military instructor that would teach you about the Army, values, etc. And then every Thursday, you also had to go to a leadership lab, which was kind of like a field exercise once a week where you meet up with all the other cadets and you would do your leadership exercises out in the woods somewhere usually. So now while you're a cadet in the ROTC program, you're going to have two paths that you can essentially choose to take. You're gonna choose either active duty or National Guard Reserve, which also splits into 2 other paths, but there are 2 main essentially paths that you can choose. The active duty path is essentially the same as the Military Academy at West Point path. You're gonna be put in an order of merit list with every other cadet in the entire country. The 2 most important things that rank you on this order of merit list is your GPA and your physical fitness score. I think when I went through, I think the GPA was worth 50%, and I think my physical fitness score was worth 30% of my overall score on my order of merit list. So you get ranked in an order of merit list at the end of your junior year, and this is essentially what's going to decide what you do in the military from here on out. And again, just like the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, aviation is the branch that everybody wants. It's going to be by far the most difficult one to get. The Army is going to take that order of merit list and decide who gets active duty first and who does not. The Army only has so many slots every year for active duty officers, so if the Army has 1,000 ROTC cadets, but they only have 500 active duty slots available, they're going to choose the top half of that Army ROTC cadet pool, and the other 50%, the other 500 cadets, are going to get pushed over to being Army Reserve or National Guard soldiers with the ones that want to be Army National Guard or Reserve soldiers. But the key here is they're going to select you for active duty first, and then they're going to give you your branch. Which is important because this could possibly mean you're going to be stuck as an active duty officer if you don't want to do anything else but fly. And once you get selected as an active duty officer, next what comes is your branch, and you might get infantry or field artillery or military intelligence, and you might not get aviation, but you're still stuck active duty. So if you're a rock star and you have a 4.0 GPA and you're a genius and you can max out your physical fitness test, then sure, you have a really good chance of being an active duty aviation officer. But there's also a twist to this. Not everybody has a 4.0 GPA, because the individual who majored in, let's say, something easy like basket weaving is clearly going to have a better chance of getting a 4.0 GPA and putting them higher on this list than the individual that chose to major in something more difficult like engineering or aerospace. They're going to have probably a lower GPA. Doesn't mean they were necessarily not as smart, but you got to think about that as well. Maybe choose a major that's easier to get a 4.0 than choosing something hard and more difficult. I lied, don't do that. That's the worst advice I could possibly give you. Go for the major that you want to get. Just understand that if it's a tough major or a tough school and you're not going to have a 4.0 GPA, you may not end up as an active duty aviation officer, but that person that did major in basket weaving, they're going to have a 4.0 and they might be able to have a higher spot on the OML than you will. So after the OML is put out and the Army selects all the active duty officers that they want, then they divvy up the branches, and aviation is always the first branch to go and get selected. So if you're not at the very top or somewhere close to the very top of cadets, you probably won't get aviation. But if you do get aviation, congratulations, you're going to be an Army aviation officer flying either the Apache, Chinook, or C-12, and of course the Black Hawk. If you so far find this information interesting or helpful, please click like or subscribe. Also leave me a comment and let me know what other videos you guys want me to cover, what other subjects you want me to cover, or other things aviation related that you want to see from me. Let me know in the comments. Also keep in mind that for all of these programs you have to have a flight physical, you have to have letter of recommendation, and you have to take the SIFT exam, which is an aptitude test to let the military know your potential to succeed in military flight school. So we talked about the active duty route in college. Now let's talk about the Reserve National Guard route, which kind of splits into 2. They're kind of the same thing. So this is the route I chose. Everything I just explained about the Army selecting active duty and then giving you your branch, I personally did not like the idea of possibly being active duty not in the branch that I wanted. Possibly being an infantry officer or a field artillery officer or something like that didn't really appeal to me, and that's not what I wanted to do. I cared about aviation more than I did anything else, so I figured out the Army Reserve or National Guard was the better option for me to become a pilot. This route also allows you to pursue something on the civilian life, like flying for the airlines, or I don't know, making YouTube videos answering questions about people, never mind. So after my sophomore year in college, when I figured out how this whole active duty versus aviation versus OML worked, I realized that I didn't want to do that process. I wanted to be a reserve officer or National Guard officer. So I changed my scholarship to a Guaranteed Reserve Forces Duty Scholarship, GFRD. So after my sophomore year, I swapped over to this pipeline and I was guaranteed to be in the Reserve or National Guard officer pipeline at the end of my commissioning. And I think this is one of the best kept secrets in order to guarantee yourself aviation, because once you switch over to Guaranteed Reserve Forces Duty, you can apply it to any National Guard unit aviation unit directly. Essentially, it's just like applying for a job. Every state has an Army Aviation unit, so you would go to that unit and say, hey, when I commission, I would like to be in your unit, I would like to fly your aircraft. And essentially what they'll do is set up an interview with you, and you're competing with one or two other people versus the entire country list of cadets. And if one state doesn't like you, you can go to the next state and apply to the next state. You don't have to live in the state that you want to fly aircraft in. Same with the Army Reserves. The Army Reserve has about 15 aviation Black Hawk units throughout the country, and I applied to one here in Florida, and that's the one I got accepted to before I was even commissioned. Before all of my peers knew what they were going to get, aviation or not, I knew that I was going to be an Army Black Hawk pilot in Florida. So that's really your third option: West Point, Army ROTC Active Duty, Army ROTC National Guard / Reserves, kind of the same thing. And then the last one is OCS. So if you're too late into your college career, or you already have a degree and you still want to fly, then OCS, Officer Candidacy School, would be the best way for you. OCS is essentially a condensed version of the other two programs. You're going to learn everything very quickly. It's full-time. I believe it is 6 to 10 weeks that you're spending doing Army stuff every day. Once you finish OCS, the process is exactly the same as the other two. You get put in an order of merit list with all of your other OCS candidates, and they're going to pick the best candidate to the worst candidate, and you're going to rank somewhere in between all of those. And just like the other programs, the top person gets first pick, and if aviation's available, then they'll get it, and they'll keep going down the list until aviation's not available. And then if it's not, you'll have to pick something else, usually active duty, and you'll have to go fly an active duty aircraft or be a commissioned officer doing something else. And just like the other two, you'll get put in an order of merit list from best to not so best. And the first person will get first pick if aviation is even available. If it's not available, they'll have to pick something else. Sometimes some classes don't even have a single aviation slot available. And if they do, it's usually very few. This is the hardest route to go to be an Army pilot. Wouldn't recommend if that's what you really want to do. If you just want to be an Army officer, sure, it's a great program, but if you want to fly and increase your chances of becoming a pilot, this is going to be your most difficult route to go for sure.